Can we get a thumbs up in the chat if people can hear
Thumbs
her
up?
fine?
Okay, great.
Awesome. Thank
Thank
you
you so
guys.
much. Yes. Well, yes, you're right, Stephen. So we're heading to the Finger Lakes tonight. It's very difficult to travel, but we are heading there, and we don't even have to leave our homes. So this is great. So this is our beautiful view of Cuca Lake. So the Finger Lakes is a collection of 11 very deep glacial lakes, and Cuca Lake is my favorite lake, but I'm very biased. It's the only lake with a fork-shaped lake, and the Cuca name comes from the Iroquois language, which was the tribe there, and that directly translates to canoe landing. So it is still today a wonderful lake for paddling and also a wonderful lake to plant vines and grow grapes. So this is our patio here, beautiful summer day in early August, I believe that photo was taken. And we've changed our tastings a little bit during COVID, but the deck is still there, and we were doing a few different sort of interesting experiences that sprouted out from needing to pivot as everyone did the past few months.
Right. So I was thinking we should go. Are these the Pinot Noir fields over off this way? That's in the block view there.
Yes, yes. So just past, if you kind of walked straight across the deck, you would head to one of our oldest blocks of Pinot Noir. Yes, exactly. So this block was planted in 1958, making it the second oldest block of Pinot Noir in America. So in addition to the two wines we're trying tonight, we also do a still red Pinot Noir. And Constantine was really a pioneer, of the European varieties. And he really started with Pinot Noir, with Riesling and Chardonnay. And he then expanded to over 60 different vinifera varieties. So Pinot Noir was always an important one for him. You can see that, we've gone through Brazen, so you can see the color is formed in the cluster. And Pinot, meaning the name comes from pine cone because of those really, really tight, small clusters. So as you can imagine, it's very challenging in a cool climate that's humid, which is exactly what we face some years. I know some of you are in Virginia, great wine in Virginia as well. Also, quite a bit more humid than what we face here in the Finger Lakes. Oh, I see some hands. Yeah, very big fan of Virginia wine as well. But Pinot Noir is one of the few varieties that's actually really well suited to a cool climate and will only tolerate a cool climate. So perfect for the Finger Lakes, but challenging to make a great wine every year. So very delicate, and it's definitely a finicky variety.
So what is
But
the
very old wines here.
like the skin consistency of Pinot Noir compared to like your table grape that people are used to?
Yes, that's a great question, Stephen. Very thin skins, and that makes it particularly prone to insects and bird damage and deer damage. And then anytime there's a puncture of the skins, you have juice kind of covering the cluster, and then you can have, different rots develop, so increase of disease pressure. So the thin skins really make it challenging, and also the tight cluster. Um, but once make a great wine with it, you never want to turn back. So it's it's a difficult one, but there are high rewards. And it's, as we know, within skins, it's challenging to get really deep dark color. So oftentimes, we hear in the tasting room, you serve someone a glass of Pinot Noir, and it's just a light, you know, very light red hue, and I said, "This is a Pinot Noir." They say, "Yeah, it is." And then a lot of the times, you're getting from California, there are some producers that will blend in, Petit Verdot, Syrah, other deeper hued varieties to expand the color a bit. So that is something we're not doing, and because of that, you're getting a low pigmentation of the Pinot Noir
Right.
red wine.
And that's going to come a lot from the cold climate. Right.
Exactly.
All
Right.
right. So we're going to head back up to the tasting deck so that way we can survey the land and
Great.
well, I guess we can go to the view of the pond. See, I liked this way because it's like we can really showcase the beauty of Dr. Frank's winery, and I think it really helps transport us out of, well, no, we're already there. We don't have to transport ourselves anywhere.
We don't need any transportation. Yeah.
So
no, exactly. Mm-hmm.
So this is your pond here on the left side, and then this is the view from the pond, right?
That's right. Yeah, so we're developing a walking path. So hopefully when all of you can come travel and be with us in person, we'll have the walking path available, and it'll pass through the pond and go down across sort of the gully, and it's a little loop through the vineyards, because we have some really old blocks surrounding just that, the brick building, which was originally Constantine's home, and that's where he started planting originally. So we definitely want to showcase that. But yeah, it is gorgeous. It's a beautiful time, especially in the summer, but all seasons are very beautiful in the Finger Lakes.
Okay. Now, is this the plot of, I think you have a couple of plots of Riesling. Is this our Riesling?
Yes, this is a block of Riesling, but the Riesling that we are having is actually coming from a few different blocks. So you can see here, we have very rocky, acidic soils, which you may be able to see some pieces of shale in the soil there. So very, very rocky. And you don't see any irrigation lines here. So we're all dry farmed on the property, which in a typical year we get enough rainfall that it's not an issue. In 2020, unfortunately, we had a bit of drought stress, so that was challenging, but the wines that resulted are very concentrated. So we had smaller grape clusters and berries, so more skin to juice ratio. So it's going to be a very good vintage, but the shale is really the soil that Constantine was first attracted to on the property. The story is that he picked up a handful of soil and in his very limited English said, "Good soil." And that was all he needed to be convinced that the Finger Lakes had potential to produce world-class wines. So the soil was the magic ingredient. Also the lake, that was important.
Also the lake, yeah. So now, the depth on this, that we're seeing on the screen right now, is this like an older Riesling vine? Because
it is.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. This block is from 1976, I believe.
Wow.
Yeah, so you can see how large the trunk is, and as the vine ages, especially with vines that are not irrigated, you're going to have really large trunks, and the root system will go sometimes 10, 12 feet down into the subsoil to pick up trace elements and water that younger vines won't be able to reach yet. So we really treasure these older vine blocks, and we take great care in maintaining them, because as the vines age, they're going to produce less fruit, but the wines that are resulting from them are going to be a lot more complex and concentrated. And it's part of our history as well, to sort of maintain these older vine blocks.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's so awesome.
So you guys, we're not going to take a full tour of all the different grape varieties, but you guys plant a lot of different varieties, not only just the Vinous vinifera that we're all used to, the Chardonnay, the Pinot Noir, and the Riesling, but you guys also have some hybrid grapes as well?
We actually don't have any hybrids, but they are found in the Finger Lakes. So that was really Constantine when he started the winery. There was the American varieties, Concord, Catawba, Niagara, the more grapes that we think of for jams and jellies. And then there were the French-American hybrids as well, which were just becoming popular. And Constantine was really bullish on vinifera, so that we only have vinifera, but we have a lot of obscure, esoteric vinifera varieties that probably sound like, not vinifera, not something anyone's ever heard of.
So on that comment,
yeah.
So we're going to head over to the Arcazzatelli field.
Oh, there we go. Look at you, prop. That was a good prop. So our Cacciatelli, this is the oldest grape in the world. Dates back to around 3000 BC. It's from originally from Georgia, so country Georgia, not state Georgia, and it has incredible history. And because Constantine was Ukrainian, he was born in Ukraine, grew up there, became a researcher and a scientist at the Polytechnic University of Odessa. Um, he was very familiar with this variety, and it was one of the first that he planted in the Finger Lakes when he came in the early 1950s. So it has a true kind of part of our heritage. We were the first to plant it. It's really not saying much because there's only a handful of plantings in America. However, for those Virginians, there is a producer that's doing great work with our Cacciatelli. If anyone's heard of Horton Vineyards.
Hmm.
Oh, great. Yeah, Dennis Horton was a friend of my grandfather's, and we had a nursery for many years, and he picked up some cuttings from the nursery and planted a big swath of it, and now they do I think a few different styles. But I actually went out, I think it was 2 years ago, to Virginia for a few events, and I visited some wineries, and Horton was one of those. And I met his daughter Shannon, and she took me out to the Arcatzelli vineyard, and it was a really nice connection. So we'll see if more producers start planting it. But it's a wonderful white grape variety, very aromatic, produces really interesting styles. We make a few different styles of wine. One is stainless steel fermented and matured, and the other is an orange wine, uh, which is really the traditional Georgian way, where you ferment on the skins and then age in large amphora vessels.
And you have
To
amphora
carry
vessels
them.
that you.
We do. Yes, we
So
have quite
cool.
a few. We don't have the Qvevri vessels that the Georgians use, where they bury them, deep in the ground for temperature control. But we're looking into it. We have a few contacts in Georgia that are consulting with us, and I think it would be a really fun project. So
Very
more to
cool.
come. Yes.
All right. So before we conclude the walking tour, we're gonna hop over. Where's the best way to get into? Okay, we should go to the Chateau House and then walk down
Yes,
the
that's
basement.
great. Perfect.
Oh, here we. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. So this house, it's built with all, I talked about the shale on Cuca. This house is built with all field stones and sand. Dates back to 1886. It was on the National Register of Historic Places as of a few years ago. And this actually, we go to another generation now. My grandfather, Willie, who was Constantine's son, and he basically wanted to carve out his own niche. So Constantine was sort of the pioneer of vinifera. He came to America at the age of 52, didn't speak a word of English, and ended up sort of changing and revolutionizing, the East Coast industry. And Willie, his son, wanted something of his own, and that he found in traditional method sparkling wines, which is what we continue today in that facility. It's directly next door. It would take you 5 minutes to walk there. So he and my grandmother lived in the front portion of the house, and then where Stephen's showing us upstairs, we do food and wine experiences, which have been put on hold um, during COVID times, but we're hoping uh, to reinvent those for hopefully this season and if not next. Um, but 2 floors below this room is where we age all of our traditional method sparkling wines,
All right.
and
Well,
we've
it takes a little
expanded.
bit to walk down the stairs. Hold on.
It does. I
We got
know it's
we got to
a
walk.
big building.
Oh,
Oh, I see we have a question about the TA for the Riesling. Yes. So what we typically do from Emily, thank you, Emily. So what we like to do is that kind of one to one roughly ratio of TA and residual sweetness. So we're careful about that, just so that you don't feel the acidity as much. So it has about 8 grams per liter TA, and then the residual is eight. Uh, I believe it's 7.8 grams per liter residual sweetness, or point. Um, I always get confused with the percent. I guess 0.7 in percent. It's funny how we consumers talk about point, you know, 0.8 or 0.7, and then it's always grams per liter in the winery.
Right.
But we like to have that 1-to-1 ratio. That's a pretty common sort of stylistic thing also in Germany, that sort of equal ratio of acidity and sweetness. But thank you for that question. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to send them over. All right, are we heading downstairs?
We're heading down the stairs.
Cool.
So here we are.
Here we are. Yeah, so this is a really great place to be stuck during a pandemic. Next time we go into lockdown, maybe you guys should drive over.
If not, the New Year's. I think New Year's
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, so in the deepest bays, you have the rows going 6 rows back. So there's a ton of wine down here. And this is all traditional methods. So the same method as if we were in Champagne, France. And my grandfather actually used to label every bottle Finger Lakes champagne. So he was really bullish on the fact that he was utilizing Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. Stephen, I know you're a big fan of Pinot Meunier.
Oh yeah, huge fan.
And he was really a fanatic about traditional method sparkling. And this was he had his first vintage in 1985. So he started this project in 1979 when nobody else was doing traditional method sparkling with these varieties. So he felt he needed to add credibility and call it champagne. So he got into a lot of fights with a lot of, especially Europeans. And he used to say, you know, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, I'm not going to call it sparkling wine just to please the French. And he just complained about that. But we did remove it after he passed away in 2006, and now we're just Métis Champenois, Finger Lakes sparkling wine. So same process, but we're just a little more PC. But basically, a lot of the primary operations occur next door at our main winery. So that includes, you know, we're harvesting. We then all of the pressing happens at our main winery.
Should I hop over somewhere? Do I have a?
Yeah, I don't know if the press deck is in there.
Okay.
We'd have to just imagine it. We'll just have to close our eyes and imagine. There we go. Yeah. So. And then the primary fermentation happens in stainless steel tanks next door. So we like to, and that's the stage we're in now. So all of the wine is blended. We do, as I mentioned, 7 different sparkling wine labels, but there's an enormous amount of blending that happens this time of year. Actually, we just finished a tasting this morning. My teeth, you know, the enamel, because the sparkling wines have such high acidity, you have to really be careful of your teeth because they start to hurt after a while. But it's an exciting time because you're deciding on the blends that are then going to go into the bottle, which are then going to be fermented again. So it's a very important step. And there's all these small lots and small vineyards that are fermented separately. And then the choices are made what's going to go into the Blanc de Noir. So this Blanc de Noir is 75% Pinot Meunier, 25% Pinot Noir. We also do a Blanc de Blanc, which is 100% Chardonnay. We do a Brut, which is Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. A Brut Rosé, which is Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. So there's all these different fractions that have to find their home in the different labels. And we like to bottle typically the first full moon of March is the folklore, I guess, from my grandfather. And that gives us good luck for the bottling. And that's the other challenge, you know, with bottling the sparkling wines, because you have to have the exact amount of yeast and sugar to add to the still wine to get it to ferment, and just to ferment to where you want it. So we actually have a sparkling winemaker who only deals with the sparkling program. His name is Eric. We call him Eric Bubbles. And he has to monitor this yeast population for the entire 2 weeks that we're bottling. And he's looking under the microscope, checking to how many million, you know, per area do we have of the yeast population to ensure that the fermentation is going to finish? Because each bottle has its own individual fermentation. It's so different to still winemaking. So once we have the ferment that's finished, which is completed in a cool room, we have between 2 to 4 months, that long, slow, cool fermentation. And the wines are capped with a crown cap. So that's important because we want to harness and to capture the carbon dioxide. That's a byproduct of fermentation. And that's where the bubbles come from. So during that secondary fermentation, the yeast that we added is going to eat the sugar that we added, create 1% or 1.5% of alcohol, and then the carbon dioxide is trapped inside the bottle because of the crown cap, and it's going to redissolve into the wine. So the photo the location, excuse me, that we were at previously, where we had a bunch of bottles, those bottles are all just sort of aging on their lees, on the dead yeast cells. And that's a really important step. It's called the yeastolysis process, where the dead yeast cells are breaking down into the wine, and that's where we get kind of the toast, the brioche, the nutty kind of character to the style of sparkling, which hopefully you get in the Blanc de Noir.
Well, we do have this picture later, but when we were going through the tour, I realized that there was this picture, and so we could pull it up now on the virtual walking
perfect.
tour.
That's exactly it. Yeah, so it's cloudy. So if we were to pick up a bottle, you would note it's almost like an adult lava lamp. There's just like floating. Kind of beautiful, actually. And that is all dead yeast that's basically fallen out of solution after the secondary fermentation. And it just takes many years for these dead yeast cells to break down. And that's why the bottles are also aged on their side, because we want as much contact as possible with the sparkling wine to pick up that character. And they're going to stay down there between 2 to 6 years, depending on the style. So it's an incredibly long time. And we also have to get that then out of the bottle, because when you taste this, it doesn't look like it would be unpleasant, but it feels like crushed glass in your mouth. It's not.
It sounds like the words of experience there.
I know. Yeah, so that's thankfully why we get it out of the bottle. And we do that by riddling. So you can see some of the A-frame riddling racks in kind of the background here. And you also see those two machines. Those are the gyro palettes. So we have the exact same thing happening. The A-frame racks were developed in Champagne by the legendary Madame Clicquot. Everyone knows Viv Clicquot. She is really kind of a Renaissance woman in Champagne. We're talking late 1800s. And she was so frustrated that she had to give away basically half the bottle by decanting out, the sediment. And she would give, half to, the peasants, and then the other half clean wine she could sell. So that's, as a businesswoman, she thought that was unacceptable. So she cut holes in her kitchen table and basically began the riddling process to settle all of the dead yeast cells into the neck. And then they were easily removed. 10 years after she developed this, her cellar master put 2 kitchen tables upright. And this is still a technique that is used today. So you can see the bottles are the 45-degree angle. They're basically pushed in and turned. So push and turn, and the yeast swings down like a pendulum into the neck over the period of about 2 weeks, twice a day. Whereas the gyro palettes, which are those 2 machines, do exactly the same thing.
Before we go on, I just wanted to comment.
Yes.
That was a really great story, and it's really amazing to hear the names that we're so used to being the names of Champagne, right? But there's really great history behind them as well. It kind of makes it feel like they're not just a marketing ploy. Like they've really contributed to the history. And maybe I'll think about them in a different light next time I have some Vouv,
You're right. No, absolutely. Now obviously they're owned by a huge, LVMH owns them, so they're very much about the marketing now. But yeah, there's actually a really great book about her life the Widow Clicquot. It has the same color, like that orange color on the cover, so you kind of can't miss it. But I would recommend it. It was a really interesting read just to hear her journey, and she really had a lot of, as you mentioned, Stephen, a lot of developments, in Champagne, and there's all these stories about her. She wanted to be the first to get into the Russian market, so she developed this super special cuvee that's sweeter, and it took so many years for the other producers to catch on, and it's a very cool story. But yeah, it is. I mean, it's amazing also what techniques were developed. We're talking many, many years ago that are still used today.
Right.
How much the wine industry has changed in some ways and how little at the same time. But these jarrow palettes were developed in the 1970s for cava production in Spain. And they do the exact same thing, but in a fraction of the time. So, and they're also a lot more accurate. You can imagine a human hand pushing and turning. You're going to have different forces every time you do that to some small degree. Whereas the jarrow palette is you can see it's sort of a cube that starts on its side completely, mirroring what the bottles look like on laying on their side. And it turns and shifts, and then every few hours shifts 5 degrees up. So at the end of its, 3 or 4 day cycle, it's completely upright with the sediment in the neck, which is exactly sort of what happens, with the neck of the bottle in the A-frame racks. And the producers in Spain thought that the French would never use a machine without a French name. So they very intelligently named it a French name, Giro Palette. And the French have widely adopted it. It's funny, going to Champagne, they'll show you all the A-frame, if anyone's into Champagne, like very romantic, the big companies anyway. The A-frame racks, they take you through, and it's so romantic. And then you stand on your tippy toes and you see rows and rows and rows of the Giro Palette. But I think that they're a great, machine and invention, and I think, they're not as widely talked about because they're not as romantic. So.
Right.
But yeah, it's
the leaves on the
technology.
Inside. So we'll swing it back around to the picture. Sorry. Does it cling to the side of the bottle, and then that's partly why you need to kind of gyrate it while you're also tilting it up?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it can kind of stick to the bottle, and you can imagine, this is between 2 to 6 years. There's a lot of sediment that's formed, and it takes a little while for it to be kind of pushed out. So yeah, exactly. That's why it takes such a long time.
Wow. Well, thank you so. This information has been so fun. So that concludes the visual virtual walking tour portion, and I think it also covers most of a lot of the bubble section, a fair bit. So
cool. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I got really ahead of myself.
No, that was wonderful.
Thank you. Those are great.
All right.
Yeah.
I got to go back over here. All right. So this is the map of where you guys are in relation to the Finger Lakes, which is in upstate New York. Just used Google Maps. But so the plaque, you guys are a historical place, which you touched on as well. Do you guys have a lot of people that come there for the tourism aspect as well as the wine?
We do. Yeah. The Finger Lakes, you can see, it is a beautiful region, but we are quite isolated. So we're about 5.5 hours from New York City, Philadelphia, maybe 5 hours. Virginia, I think it took me like 6 hours or so to get to the DC area. So, we're not super close to any large city, but I think that's kind of part of the magic of it. And we do get about 80,000 visitors a year, depending on, the season. This year obviously was less just because we required reservations and we had different safety standards to think about, but in a typical season, we would expect that many. And, people from all over the world come because they visit Niagara Falls and then they want to see New York City, and we're sort of in the middle of those two destinations. So it's
So for those of you who are thinking about going out to the Finger Lakes to enjoy this wine, see these beautiful lakes, you have to realize that it is a difficult level of enotourism because there are no bridges over each of these lakes. So when you commit down one side of the lake, you have to go the whole way. You can't back turn either. That's against the rules. You have to go the whole way down and then the whole way up the other side of the lakes. And then you got to move on to the next lake. It is a really high level, commitment to head out there. So
luckily it
That's
seems
very
really
true.
beautiful.
it does, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Lots of driving,
Lots
but it's
of
worth it.
So we are going to now get into the specifics of the Riesling that we have here. And one of the things that I really enjoyed on your website, so I guess, it's important to notice that these are unoaked, so there is no malolactic fermentation that happens. And, the malolactic fermentations would add body, but it's not typically done at all with Riesling. And one of the things that I loved about your website was that you broke down kind of the tasting essences by where they are in your different plots that you have, right? And so on the tasting notes, they say like the lime and the green apple, and even the petrol notes come from your Cuca estate. And is that how, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. And for those who are drinking the Riesling that have it being really chilled, the petrol note of it is going to be a little bit more muted. I don't think that this is necessarily a really aggressive petrol note either. But on that, your website says that these can age for a while. Now, was that this specific bottle? Because I noticed that it's a screw cap. So can wine age in a screw cap?
Yes, it can. And it actually is going to have a bit more of a sort of an insured projection, to the future, if that makes sense. So my dad always jokes that I was brainwashed in Australia because that's where I did my graduate degree. And we didn't even have a corkscrew at our house. So bottles of wine that were $500, which we weren't drinking every night, but, once in a while someone would get a sample. We're all under screw cap. And a lot of the Australian wines that you find, especially in the luxury range, are fitted with cork just for the American market. So there is a lot of misconception about screw caps as a closure. And what we love about screw caps is they certainly can age, and there's trials, especially through Australia and New Zealand, going back to the early 1970s with Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay in Western Australia. And the wines have aged at a consistent rate, and there's absolutely no way that they could have developed any cork taint or any random oxidation, which are both problems with cork. And because we're in the Finger Lakes, we're in the eastern U.S., we haven't had the luxury always of grade A corks. A lot of the grade A corks, we're talking in the 80s and the 90s, were going to the West Coast. They were going to California. And so we believe we had a higher incidence of cork taint and random oxidation compared to the national average. And we even heard this from a cork manufacturer. He told us this, just to let you know, like, this did happen. They would send their A corks, to California and their B, C corks to the East Coast. And so as a region, we have adopted alternative closures just because we've sort of had to deal with that. But particularly with the aromatic whites, we're very concerned with oxidation and even a touch of cork taint, which cork taint has sort of a musty kind of aroma. And if it just is slightly corked, you can just diminish the fruit. So you can't really tell that something's super wrong with it. It just isn't a very pleasing wine. So that's sort of a really challenging thing for us because we want our wines to be really expressive and really aromatic. So if the fruit is slightly dimmed from this cork taint that you know, literally put in at the last step of all of the hard work, you know, the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into making the wine, that just, you know, it doesn't work for us. So we feel that screw cap is the best option for us going forward, especially for the aromatic whites. And we started this, I believe, in 2013. We started utilizing screw caps, and you know, even opening wines from that time, they're fresher than their cork counterparts because we did half and half at, you know, those early years. So certainly the wines can age. They're just going to age at a slower, more controlled rate. Sorry, that was a really long rant.
No, I
But I'm like very passionate about
yeah.
screw caps.
The one thought that we had while drinking a couple of glasses of wine, was the sound that a corkscrew makes. I think we should get a group of engineers to engineer that sound to be a little bit different and more pleasant sounding.
Definitely.
Because I mean, everybody knows when they hear a bottle of bubbles pop, there's just this visceral feeling that you get. So you know, maybe we can engineer the sound effect of a screw cap coming off. It's such a small thing, but
Yeah, and that's honestly the biggest complaint that we get from consumers is the sound. And actually, speaking to our Stelvin, our screw cap manufacturer, they taught me a trick, which I already opened the dry Riesling. But if anyone has the dry Riesling in front of them and hasn't opened it, I will show you this. And for those of you who have, you can just follow along. So basically, you take kind of the skirt portion. So, you know, you have the skirt portion and then the cap. And you're actually going to twist the skirt instead of the cap. And you get a much nicer sound. It's like a click, 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 click instead of a rick. So I would recommend everyone try that the next time you have a screw cap bottle because it is slightly more pleasing.
So
cool.
I'm having a great conversation, and I hope everybody is as well, because we're still only on drink one, and I think that's absolutely fine.
Sorry.
So this wasn't part of what we were planning on talking about today, but I remembered from the last time I talked with you, aren't you guys exploring something with music and the tasting rooms?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, so we did a study with Cornell University, Oxford, and Berklee School of Music, actually in that food and wine experience, which I was sharing with you all in that space above the sparkling cellar. And we did this study, and there's all of these ideas about wine, playing wine while you're having food and having wine, and how the music affects the bitterness, the sweetness, the acidity, the umami, all of the flavors, and what tones in music bring out different senses, you know, in the wine, or different sensations. And so we did a study, and it was a really wonderful experience. It was actually a bitterness. We focused on bitterness and tones in different soundtracks of music that were composed by this author at the Berklee School of Music. And we did find an effect. I think that it's also, you know, people were really paying attention to how the wine and the food tasted as well. So that could have, you know, had an effect also in the survey results. But I think that there's no denying that there are synergies, you know, between your senses of, you know, tasting, hearing. And so when I do wine dinners now, especially when it's dinners with a lot of locals who know our story really well, I do art, wine, and music pairings I just did my first one over Zoom, which is really the only way to do it because doing it in person is kind of difficult. But it was great, and you know, people really enjoyed the pairing part, and you get certain kind of attributes out of the wine, and I think that there's a lot to be discovered in that sphere.
That's awesome.
That sounds so great.
Yeah.
I would love to do something like that someday.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we gotta come up.
I'll be part of the blind study. You can just
ask
me my opinion. And,
Perfect.
And so then
That
to
sounds
round
great.
out, you guys also attributed tangerine and like more citrus notes. I do really detect this grapefruit on the palate that you don't
Hmm.
get on the nose, on the aromas, and it's really wonderful.
Oh, good.
Again, great wine. Love the Riesling.
So delicious.
So delicious. So thank you for all that hard work that you guys put into this.
Yes.
Oh, well, thank you. I hope everyone's enjoying it. Thank you. This is really our kind of pride and joy. Riesling is makes up 60% of what we produce, and the dry is one of our biggest labels. So we really take it very seriously.
Yeah. Very cool. All right.
Great.
So now while everybody enjoys their Riesling, just kind of so Dr. Frank came over from Ukraine. Would you give us like a quick little about him, and then we're gonna kind of go through the lineage, and then we're gonna get into the part that I really want to talk about.
That's good. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I really delved into it way too much in the tour.
No.
I get carried away. But yeah, Constantine, you can see these two photos. He's looking very proud in the one on the left. And he has good reason to be proud because he did something that nobody thought was possible. And that was planting the European varieties here in the eastern U.S., in the Finger Lakes. So as I mentioned, he was born in Ukraine. From a very young age, was enamored with wine and grape growing. His father had his own sort of hobby vineyard in the backyard, and Constantine was said to have made his first wine by the age of 12.
Wow.
So, he was really interested in it from a young age in plant science and grape growing. So he went on to earn a PhD, and his thesis was planting vinifera, the European varieties, in cold climates. So something that would exactly set him up for what he did. And the family lived through a lot, as many immigrant families did, through World War One, Russian Revolution, World War Two, and that one was particularly difficult, where the family was actually lucky enough to flee out of Ukraine, out of Odessa, and to New York City. And Constantine was at the age that most would consider retiring, and started a whole new life for his family, for his wife and 3 children. And they made their way up to the Finger Lakes. Constantine had a short stint at the experiment station here in Geneva, which is still our premier experiment station in the Finger Lakes. And there was no vinifera, there was no European varieties, and the thought was it's too cold. And he said, absolutely not. It's not too cold. He used to say in the winter your spit would freeze before it hit the ground. That there's no way that it was too cold in the Finger Lakes, that vinifera survived in Ukraine, it would survive in the Finger Lakes. And he was right. And basically the failure was that there's this pest called phylloxera. So a tiny bug with a really long name, phylloxera, and it's from North America. So maybe you've heard of it, but it's sort of the secret killer. It's killed vineyards, throughout the world, and made its way with the advent of the steamship over to Europe. And we're talking, mid 1800s, devastated vineyards of Bordeaux and Burgundy, made its way to Italy and Spain, and then finally over to Eastern Europe, where Constantine had to deal with this pest. And researchers developed sort of a cure, a completely natural method, where they grafted American rootstock, which is naturally resistant to the pest phylloxera. It just doesn't want to eat the American varieties. And like a puzzle piece, grafted it with the European scion, or the European variety, and that is the natural method that they were using, and that's what Constantine introduced to the eastern U.S., and that is commonplace today.
Wow. I mean, that is... So the next person that we're going to talk about is Willie, and so no wonder why he felt that he needed to bring champagne. That's a tough man to follow there.
It is, and they were like oil and water. they did not get along.
Oh,
You know,
really?
family businesses are always challenging, and this one is no different. But yeah, Willie wanted to kind of make a name for himself, and you know, where Constantine was a researcher and a scientist, Willie was he was sort of a passionate, enthusiastic businessman, and really saw an opportunity with sparkling wines. But he was really seen as one of the first Finger Lakes sort of quality ambassadors, you know, pounding the pavement every night. He would do store tastings, he'd do wine dinners, he'd travel, you know, all the time. And he was really spreading the word about the Finger Lakes. So definitely important work. And this is at a time when, you know, they'd say, what are you saying, Finger Lakes? For some reason you still hear, but it's not as much anymore.
Right. And so then the third generation was your father.
Yes. Yep. That's my dad, Fred. So I work with him every day. It's great. He is joined the winery in 1993, and he started a value line called Salmon Run, which now makes up about half of our production. And this was at the time when the economy sort of had a downturn, and he decided he wanted to do a second label, and that's Salmon Run. And we talked, you know, we saw the pond. We actually just had a local artist build a sculpture, huge sculpture of a salmon to pay homage to our brand Salmon Run, which is sort of a tribute to the landlocked salmon of Huka Lake, which you can fish for. So when you all come, it's very difficult to find them, but they can be found. But yeah, so he has really expanded the winery both in production and also in quality and accolades, and he's made it sort of a really great environment for me to come in and to try some things out. So it's been great. We're kind of the first pair that gets along.
Oh.
First pair of generations.
And then I just saw this picture and threw it up there because you are the fourth generation. We will get into your story after the bubbles tasting. But
Sure.
so first you were talking about how he grafted. So he grafted things by hand, and this is a picture of that grafting process, which is just really incredible.
Yes,
So now,
yeah, he would actually use a pocket knife to graft. Now we have a machine, but yeah, it is incredible.
so this was the story that you shared about him reaching out to UC Davis. And so I did my research and I found the publication in 1976 from UC Davis that says phylloxera-resistant rootstock varieties. And so it lists St. George, which is what you guys use up in the Finger Lakes there. But the big debacle was that they recited this AR1. That's a hybrid between the phylloxera-resistant species that allows good yield and performs under irrigation. Now, this is my research, so I'm not quite sure if it's exactly the right situation, but I think it sets the stage for the letters that Frank wrote to UC Davis.
That's
So
right.
could you share that story with us? Because that was just a fascinating story.
Absolutely. Yeah, so Constantine, you know, you can imagine he learned English late. He spoke 9 languages, but didn't speak any English when he arrived here. So that sort of plagued him throughout the rest of his life. So it really caused people not to take him seriously. And he was really upset because the Commissioner of Agriculture at UC Davis was recommending this fruit stock, as you mentioned, Stephen, AXR1, which he knew from his viticulture research. You know, he was seen as really like a foremost expert in viticulture in Eastern Europe. Nobody knew him in America. You know, he had no credibility. So he knew it had a vinifera parent, which means that it was susceptible to phylloxera. And UC Davis was speaking about this rootstock like it, you know, was the next best thing, you know, since sliced bread, and that everyone should start planting it. And this was at the time of the boom of, you know, California winemaking. So a lot of growers adopted it as their rootstock, and Constantine would continue to write these letters to this Commissioner of Agriculture explaining in his broken English, that it was not a viable rootstock because it had been overparent, and that eventually the vines would be susceptible to phylloxera. And of course, this fate did come true. They unfortunately didn't listen to him. But throughout the 80s, there had to be this huge scheme in California ripping out a lot of vines, replanting with phylloxera-resistant rootstocks. So because of Constantine's foresight, we've had phylloxera-resistant rootstocks from day one. And because of that, we have very old vines. And it is unfortunate what happened, but it just kind of goes to show, the hindsight's always 2020, and just believing in everything at face value is just not the way to go. But yeah, he tried. He definitely tried to make some headway with that. But and then St. George. So you hear a lot in California. You don't hear old vines very often, but you hear old vines Zinfandel. I'm sure everyone has heard that. It's sort of kind of a tagline with Zinfandel. And Zinfandel had always been planted with the rootstock St. George. That was just a very common rootstock, and that is phylloxera resistant. So you do still hear very commonly about old vine Zin. So that's sort of the exception.
Yeah, and so that's actually, for everybody who's attending, that's why our next lecture is on Old Vine, Laudy, Zinfandel. We're doing a battle of the Zins. So we're doing Laudy, Old Vine versus Primitivo in Italy. And so that's fun. The segue for everybody who is paying attention.
That's awesome.
Everything's connected.
Everything's connected in the wine world.
Exactly.
So I don't know if you had much more to say before we get into the bubbles tasting, because we've had such a wonderful journey so far but if there's anything else that you think is prevalent, or should we just get into the bubbles?
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't know if anyone has any questions, but hopefully I covered the process. It's a very different process, as I mentioned, to still winemaking. So very precise. And because of the two fermentations, it's just a really, I think, beautiful process. So excited to have the taste this part of it already.
Yeah. Okay. So now we are going to get into the bubble tasting. So would you like to pour for us?
Oh, sure. We sampled a little bit earlier.
Nice. Yeah, so this one is one of my favorite sparklings. I'm excited about it.
The 75% Pinot Meunier was what really spoke to my heart and why we had to have it today.
We love Pinot Meunier.
It is such a delicious
I know, you guys
grape.
are like champions for Pinot Meunier. I'm so happy that you're spreading the word, because it's not a very well-known variety.
I do notice that a lot of grower champagne, the big champagne houses don't necessarily seem to be gravitating towards, making high Pinot Meunier grapes, but a lot of grower champagnes really are doing some great experiments with it, and it produces these wonderful, the notes that you look for in your non-zesty, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So Prosecco and Cava have these very fresh, zippy ripeness, but I really like these the champagne style grapes that exhibit these bready notes, these this almost like hazelnut and pastry dough.
Notes are nice.
Yeah, and so I really appreciate that you guys have the Pinot Meunier in this Blanc de Noir.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's definitely kind of an unsung hero of the champagne varieties, Pinot Meunier. And Meunier means miller, I believe. If anyone speaks French, please correct me, because I do not speak French, and I believe it means miller. But actually, we have our Pinot Noir and our Pinot Meunier planted every other row in our block, in our sparkling block, and you can tell that it's Pinot Meunier by flipping over the side of the leaf. And the leaf actually has this white fuzz, the Pinot Meunier leaf, and it's because a miller, it looks like a miller, like a baker would slap their hand on the leaf full of flour, and that's why I believe why they call it Pinot Meunier. So that's the way to tell if the underside of the leaf has a white fuzz, it's Pinot Meunier, and if it doesn't, it's Pinot Noir. At least in our vineyard, but they look very similar. And Pinot Meunier also has a thin skin, but it has a really beautiful sort of floral note that I think brings a lot of freshness, as you mentioned, Stephen, and also some added sort of floral components.
Mm-hmm.
But very challenging to make a Blanc de Noir. So white from black, that French I do know, that much I do know. And you can imagine, you can't have any contact at all between the skins and the juice because that is going to cause coloring and it's going to end up in the final wine. With the skin contact, you also have bitterness and astringency coming from the skins. So we want to avoid that completely. However, we are talking about two red grapes. So this is our most rich, most full-bodied style of sparkling because we're made with two red varieties. Even though it doesn't have any color, it can certainly stand up to richer foods. And I see Emily asked, "What's your favorite pairing for sparkling wine?" And I think this Blanc de Noir could stand up to some heavier dishes. With sparkling, I would do different things if it was a Blanc de Blanc with the Chardonnay base versus a Blanc de Noir. I've even had this Blanc de Noir, with meat dishes, and it pairs very well, especially very delicate, like thinly sliced meats. Duck works well. Any sort of meat that you prepare in a simple way, I would recommend with the Blanc de Noir. Whereas the Blanc de Blanc, you could go as simple as potato chips are a beautiful pairing, even though it is quite simple. Of course, oysters, filleted fish. The possibilities are sort of endless, but you could certainly go a little heavier in food pairing.
I do feel that, I succumb to that idea that in the wintertime I like to have my red wines versus in the summertime I do like my white wines. And so since basically the start of 2020, we've been drinking a lot of bubbles. In the wintertime we have to be drinking our Blanc de Noir.
I like that.
But it does give you this sense, this feeling of more, like you were saying, like the body is richer. There's this comforting feeling that you can drink with this, and there isn't this rush to drink it quickly at all. It's really meant to be savored. And one of the talking points that we've mentioned in our other sparkling lectures is that the nicer the bubbles are, the warmer you can actually serve it. This does not need to be served ice cold, and in fact you would lose a lot of the tasting notes if it was straight from a bucket of ice. So again, great quality, and I love the very fine bubble structure. And it doesn't like just foam and mousse in your mouth. It really just has this delicate dance on your tongue, and then just evaporates into the back of your throat, and you're just left with this wonderful acidity and these tasting notes.
Oh, great! Well, I'm so glad. Yeah, it's certainly, and I think that the bead, the fineness of the bead and the bubble, is really attributed to the time spent aging on the leaves. So, you notice that the label says 2016 Blanc de Noir. That was the year that the grapes were harvested. And if everyone has their bottle with them, you can turn it around and find a sticker on the back label, and it says disgorged and then the month and the year. So it should have been probably disgorged sometime this year, but we disgorge every month of every year. So
ours was disgorged in June. So
oh, there we go.
Yeah, thank you. Very
nice.
Cool. Very fun.
Yeah, so the
I've seen some
disgorging
people
process is... Yeah, sorry, Steven.
Oh no, I'm seeing some people hold up their labels so that way everybody can see what month theirs are. I love it.
Yes. So that's when the sediment was removed, essentially. So when we did all the finishing touches, is when we disgorged it. So that's a nice way to see kind of the time that it's spent aging on the leaves, which is where you get this fine bead and the brioche and the toast notes coming through.
And so, a lot of us, we are in the intellectual property world, and, your trademark that you have with the leaf and the font of your name really goes a long way to not only just create your brand, but to, like, brand loyalty is so important, because when you say that you had it for 4 years on the lees, like, that's only as good as your word, because the United States doesn't enforce those regulations. And so that's why I really love highlighting these Meet the Producer events, especially inside of the United States, to highlight all the work and to have people get to meet you specifically. And so that way they can develop a sense of trust, because what you say on your label and on your tasting notes is only your word. And, when you taste this, you can taste that it has the quality. And then when they see the brand and the leaf and the font, they know that quality transfers into that bottle as well. Even if they haven't already had that specific bottle, they're willing to maybe go on a journey with you. And so that's, thank you guys for creating an awesome product. It's
No,
really
thank
is
you.
amazing.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. But yeah, certainly it's not regulated as it is in Europe. So you definitely have to take great care, in trusting the producer, and we take that seriously.
Um, so this is kind of a little bit experiment for everybody at home. So we have the bread and the floral notes and the pear and the strawberry. So see if you can kind of get those, those aromas coming out of your glass. And this is also why we prefer to have the white wine glass. We actually have the universal glass, but also a white wine glass, because it will help to collect the aromas, so you can stick your snout in there and really kind of get those essences. Whereas if you have your coupe glass or a flute, the aromas don't have kind of the shape to get stuck in the glass. I do feel that if you drink wine out of even different types of wine, white wine versus universal versus red wine, you can even get different phenolic compounds. And I think a lot of the Psalms will say, like, when you hold it closer and further away, you can detect those different essences. And so, maybe approach your glass of wine from different lengths after you twirl it, which is an interesting thing, because a lot of people are like, oh, I can't twirl a champagne glass. It's going to destroy the bubble structure in the glass. And to that, I think it's important to highlight that when you pour a glass of champagne, it really should be more on the 4-ounce pours. It is better to have a 4-ounce pour and then top off, drink it completely and then pour another 4 ounces, than it is to pour an 8-ounce glass and have the bubble structure kind of fall apart halfway through, or even topping off after you've drank a little bit. You're just not going to get the same experience. And there's so much effort that goes into creating a bottle of champagne versus a bottle of wine, and it's important to understand, kind of how we're supposed to approach it and drink it to get the best experience possible, as well as what we pair our food with, and evidently what we visually take in art, and our ears with our music. I mean, that's all such an amazing attribute to create an experience that you can connect with not only the wine but the world around you. So very, very cool. All right. And now, one of my favorite parts is we get to grill you. We get to talk about you now, Meaghan.
Okay.
So when you were talking about this idea of 4 generations of family, it's really interesting to see that you guys have pictures of the generations working with the future generation from a very young age in the vines. And so, what has been your experience just growing up in a vineyard, and maybe even like your perspective as a woman growing up and knowing that you're going to one day inherit this? Did you know that you were going to inherit this business, or did you kind of did your dad make you work for it first? How was that?
Yeah, it's a very valid question. I as many do growing up in a particular family business, I had no interest at all. I did enjoy hearing about it, I would say, but I didn't feel very connected I do have a brother. He's not seen in this photo of my sister. I'm the one with pigtails there. I have a younger brother, and his middle name is Constantine. From a very young age, he was sort of the chosen one, the boy of the family to take over the business. And uh, he is just 2 years younger. My sister's 1 year younger, so we're all a year apart. My parents really panicked and planned us all in a row. And yeah, I as the oldest just felt like I just wanted to go out on my own, and I really fell in love with wine in college, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but um, I went to Cornell and they have an ag school, which I attended, and a lot of the science classes I had to take, I could take wine classes. And I really honestly fell in love with wine there, which is a very odd thing after growing up with winery in the family. But I was able to come to it with a different exposure, a different perspective, and a lot of the terms I heard were familiar. I was able to go talk to my dad about them, and he was excited that I was sort of developing this interest. And at the same exact time, my brother, who is entering into into Cornell as a freshman, his interest started to wane, and then my interest grew, and we sort of switched spots. And he's now working in finance in San Francisco, and my dad was excited that I had an interest, so he really told me I needed to leave for a while and see, what another industry would look like, and get see if I could get a graduate degree. So that's when I moved to Australia, which I kind of mentioned with the screw caps. I moved to Adelaide, and I really enjoyed my time there. There's 5 wine regions within an hour's drive in South Australia. So it was really a wonderful exposure to the wine industry and to see what people were doing down there, to meet multi-generational family wineries as well, or family business owners
Yeah,
to build
so
those
I do have
networks.
I have a question about Australia versus the United States in terms of like the culture around wine. Could you like
Hmm.
kind of tap on like key into that for a little bit, like working in the vineyards down there versus here in the culture and the people that you meet around there?
Sure. Yeah, Australia doesn't have the same sort of taboo or issue with wine being taboo as we do in the US. So there, it's much more of a European mindset. Young people drink wine from an earlier age. Wine is very accepted. Consumers know a lot about wine. So it's funny because, we think of Australian wine, or a lot of Americans think of Australian wine as sort of Yellowtail and Penguin Bay
Yes.
and these really bulk, awful producers. And, so many people would say, why are you going to Australia? Like, they have crappy wine down there. You're not going to learn anything. And you're just going to be surfing and be at the beach all the time. And I said, oh, we'll see what happens. But yeah, it is a very different culture around wine. And I was really impressed, and I took probably the most away from the wine tourism aspect. So, visiting wineries there, they have so many really cool and unique experiences where, you're meeting the winemaker, you're doing food and wine experiences. Many times there's restaurants on site, vineyard tours, it's really a multi-sensory, there's a lot of care taken in the guest experience. But also in the winery, the technology is so important, because they're so isolated as a country. They've been very quick to adopt different, pieces of machinery in the vineyard and the winery to make operations more efficient. So a lot of the research, the kind of foremost research, especially on, which is very helpful to producers in California right now, regarding smoke taint from the fires that just occurred. A lot of that research is coming from Australia because they've dealt with a lot of the same things. Um, but basically, very focused on technology and the guest experience would be my my
Very
answer to
cool.
that.
Very cool. And so, I mean, of course, we are concerned with Australian producers because I believe the 200% tariff from China, because that was their main importer for high quality wine was China, and now China imposed a 200% tariff on there. But maybe that does open up the market for Americans to get their hands on some higher quality. If you see a more expensive Australian wine in the stores, it might be because now they're looking for another market to get into. And so they've always been there. We just never had access to it. And so very cool. Well, thank you for that insight. Okay, so you left Australia and now you're back and you're in the vineyard. So how was that experience, I guess, working your way back up at Dr. Frank once you came back from Australia?
Yeah, it was good. You know, there were certainly challenges with coming back to a business that, you know, many of the staff had seen me grow up from a very young age. So sort of gaining their trust and listening to them and developing those relationships in a professional way was certainly a challenge. But over the last, I guess it's been about 7 years now since I've been back. I have to think about that. Yeah, about 7.5 years. So I've learned to pick my battles and to, you know, my dad has been actually the best sport with everything and letting me sort of take control of some ideas and giving me a lot of freedom and autonomy. So I'm very thankful for that. And it's certainly gotten better. The beginning was challenging, but it's gotten a lot better. And I think we've made great strides with some of our projects and with our team and with our company culture as well.
All right, my one last question for you was, you know, how did you guys adapt into the COVID landscape, and what was that experience like for you, being the VP at that point in time?
Sure. Yeah, it's I know it's been challenging, you know, for everybody. We closed. We, you know, needed to close as per New York State guidelines. I believe we closed in March, beginning of March, and we were closed until the beginning of June. And, you know, that was very difficult because I wasn't sure if we were going to be able to remain open in terms of production and shipping and all of those sorts of things. Luckily, we were. We were deemed an essential business. People need wine, right?
Yes,
they do. They need it more than ever.
Exactly. And I'm very thankful because, you know, the vines are not going to wait for us,
Right.
You know, to wake up. We have to continue with pruning and bottling. You know, we have our tanks are full. So very thankful. And then we just basically switched to e-commerce, switched our focus. So we started doing these staff stories, highlighted different staff members with their favorite at-home meal, their favorite activity. We got really creative with it. And then just internally, we tried to keep morale up. You know, we did a step challenge among the team where we had, you know, staff members competing for, I think it went on for 6 weeks. And by the end, there were 2 front runners. And one of our team members walked literally for 25 miles for 2 days straight to get a $100 gift card to a restaurant. I was like, wow, you really wanted that gift card. But he, you know, he won it, and people got very competitive. It was a very fun challenge. We're going to try to replicate it hopefully next month. And then the loser got a case of Corona. So we had people competing to have the least steps. So we had a lot of fun with that. We did an outdoor concert for our staff with one of our team members. You know, we just tried to kind of, you know, be positive and make sure that they knew that we were making sure that their health was our priority. So, you know, really creating a culture of masks because we have to go in every day physically to work. You know, we're seeing people still, we're seeing the public, you know, making sure we had all of the necessary equipment, just ensuring that they felt safe at work was important. So I think we've really grown as a company and as a team, and that's certainly been a silver lining, I think. And I feel closer to everybody, you know, because we've gone through this.
Wow. I mean, it sounds like one heck of a team building activity just for the past year. That's
Sure.
Congratulations on getting through, and you know, and wish you the best of luck on bottling when
Thank
that
you.
comes up, because that's soon, right?
Very soon. Yeah, should be in about 2 weeks. We're just waiting for labels.
Okay.
But yeah,
Cool.
should be about 2 weeks. Yeah. So 2020, it'll be the year we all remember for a vintage. So we'll have to stock up.
Yeah. Well, Meaghan, thank you so much for coming in today. This was just such a wonderfully fun conversation to have with you, and I have learned so much, not only about the history at Dr. Frank, but about wine in general. And thank you for sharing your passion with us and your family. This has been a wonderful experience. So thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And happy birthday, Stephen. Cheers to you.
Yay! Yes.
Yay!
happy birthday.
Cheers. Salud.
Bubbles.
Prost. Oh, we got bubbles. Mm, nice. Yeah, thank you. And I hope everyone can come up and visit us in the Finger Lakes sometime soon. So nice to see you all tonight. Thank you.
Yes. We'll be up there as soon as we can.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
All right. And so
Perfect.
for all the people on YouTube, I'm ending the stream. So please like, comment, and subscribe. I have to say that. You have to every time. All right. I'm ending the stream. Goodbye. All right.